There we go.
All right. Hello, everyone, aka Amanda. Hopefully others will trickle
Hi
in. Hi. Hopefully others will trickle in. If not, they will check out the recording later. So welcome to class 8. In this class, we're going to go over the post-harvest scope and logo use. This class should go pretty quickly just because these things don't apply to everybody, every farmer. Only a few of our farmers use the post-harvest scope. And typically they use it if one, they have a buyer that's asking for this scope to be completed, or they have a pretty extensive post-harvesting processing area. Um, so that's just a little intro about the post-harvest scope. All right, so just jumping right in, the post-harvest operation policy. Um, the post-harvest operation scope covers many of the same topics addressed in general and field scopes. So if we've all done our job correctly, then this scope should be pretty simple to complete. The operation has a policy and takes affirmative steps to ensure that all fresh produce that are packed or stored in the operation are grown following requirements in the field operation and harvesting harmonized standard. Um, so you may be your own raw product supplier, you may be a separate post-harvest operation, such as a food hub, or you may be a combination where you have your own product, but also take product from other suppliers. So if that's you, then this scope could apply to you. So P 1.1, if you're an aggregator, again, food hub, distributor, something like that, then this criteria is critical. It requires records as the documentation, which means your suppliers must provide you with evidence that they are following food safety GAP practices. And so a way to do this is your suppliers could provide you with access to their records, such as harvesting, cleaning, and sanitizing. You should know about your supplier situation, if they field pack, if they have animals on site or nearby, what their water source is, things like that. And you could provide your suppliers with record templates to use and require records as part of the partnership. So P2 facility, this section covers the buildings used for the post-harvest operations. Some key considerations in P 2.1. Can the building and equipment be cleaned and maintained so as to prevent contamination of product? This includes chill and cold storage areas, loading docks, etc. Pipes and overhead fixtures, making sure that they're not dripping onto the product. And water is drained or captured and disposed of away from the product and product contact surfaces. So just making sure that the building is in good working condition. Um, some other key considerations, lighting must be adequate to enable cleaning and repairs. And then this scope really looks at the lighting that's over your product. What is it? Is it glass or brittle plastic? Light bulbs shall be safety bulbs or otherwise protected. So just making sure that if that glass were to break, it's not going to fall into the product. Um, and then you must maintain a glass and plastic policy has to be mentioned in the field scope. So the additional information here is just a register or list of items. This applies to catwalks too, if in use. I think most of our operations in Hawaii don't have catwalks, but that would fall under this section as well. So some other key considerations, if applicable, operation has a written allergen control program. So basically making sure that the product that you're selling is not stored or touching or near things that are considered an allergen, milk, eggs, fish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans, and sesame. So if you're holding any of these alongside your fruits and veggies, we'll need to address the risks and the mitigations in place to make sure that the food, your product that you're selling isn't touching or becoming contaminated with these allergens. Pest and animal control. So this is touched on in the other scopes. It just gets a little bit more extensive in this one here. Um, for example, you'll have to have a map of where you have your pest control things out in place. So if you've got rat traps or bait traps, things like that, we'll want to know where those are placed. And having a map on file showing where those are placed is part of this criteria. And yeah, restrict animals from food handling areas. This is a mandatory one. So just keeping this in mind for this post-harvest scope. So again, pest control devices are located so as not to contaminate produce or product and handling surfaces, making sure that the traps are non-toxic. Um, And then equipment, tools, and utensils, all food contact equipment, etc., is easy to clean and maintain. This is a mandatory one. The auditor will observe and review procedures which are already developed. A cleaning and sanitizing log will be another supporting document for this one. So again, this is touched on in the other scopes, but it becomes just a little bit more extensive for this one because we'll want to document when the floors are cleaned, when the roof is swept off of, with branches and brush and things like that, your drains, your walls, just pretty much your whole inside of the processing building, making sure that it's clean and in good working condition. And then so equipment, tools, and utensils, the equipment installed so that it is easily accessible for cleaning and lubrication is food grade unless specified by the manufacturer. Measurement instruments like scales need to be maintained and regularly calibrated. So this is a record that we can create on Heavy Connect for you to keep track of that. And foreign material control devices are inspected. This is a record if included in the farm safety plan. Again, maintenance and sanitation. So I kind of touched on this, roofing, drains, things like that. You'll want to make sure everything is just in good working condition and looking nice and tidy, and that there is an SOP in place to maintain these things as part of the building cleanliness and maintenance. Cleaning equipment and tools are clean and stored properly, so everything just nice and organized as it can be. Food contact surfaces are clean and sanitized and maintained according to the Farm Food Safety Plan. That one is a mandatory, and this is a record that should already be kept. Yeah, it would be shown on your cleaning and sanitizing log and the post-harvest section of your harvest log. Transporting equipment is maintained to prevent contamination. So this includes pallet jacks, forklifts, etc. And these will all be listed on your master cleaning document as well. And then waste materials are managed to avoid contamination. This is a little bit redundant because this is kind of touched on in the other scopes as well. But here for the post-harvest scope, you need to have a little blurb in there about your waste materials and management, how the rubbish bins are taken care of, where they're placed, who picks it up, what the policy is there. And then sewage and septic systems are maintained and adequate for the process to prevent direct or indirect contamination. This is a mandatory criteria. So just having something in your farm plan that addresses your sewage and your septic systems. I think this is where you take it, Lisa. Yeah.
Yep, I was trying to get myself unmuted. So we're going to move on through this scope, and I'm going to take over and talk a little bit about post-harvest water and ice now. As Ingrid said, if the post-harvest scope is one that you're doing, there is a lot of repetition. So in this part of it, water system description, this has already been prepared. So in most cases, when we do have a farm that does this scope, we're just copying and pasting what we've already written into this section of the farm plan. We would already have done an assessment of your water delivery system, and we would if you're doing this scope, include anything about that system that might be different for post-harvest operations. So we would just make sure that we include that. The other things here include your process for washing or rinsing your produce. That is mandatory. So if we are doing this scope with you, we'll have a detailed write-out of how you are handling after you've harvested your product, how you're handling it to clean it off. Any antimicrobial treatments that you are using here would be monitored. This one is one where we do spend a little bit of time talking about this concept because recirculated water is the phrase that is used in this part of the scope, and it always causes confusion. So recirculated water means that if you are using a sink or some other container and you stop that up, so you've got water sitting in it and you're putting your batches of product in there to rinse them off over and over again, that is considered recirculated water. What would not be considered recirculated water is if you have that sink stopped up, you put one batch of Swiss chard in there and you rinse it, and then you take it out, you dump the water and you refill. That is not recirculated, but recirculated is if you're adding your batches over and over again to the same water. In that case, if that's what you're doing, you do have to add an antimicrobial to prevent cross-contamination. It's not trying to necessarily clean off the product so much as the sanitizer is for the water. So it has to be properly labeled, and you do have to keep a log of that. We do have some farms that do this, so it's definitely something that can be done. We've created logs for it. It's not that hard. So just keep that in mind. If that is something that you're doing and we're doing the post-harvest scope, we'll help you through that. Another important piece of this scope is understanding if the commodity or the products that you are growing and that are being audited here are products that might have a temperature differentiation when you put them in the water. If the product is a different temperature, especially a very different temperature than the wash water or rinse water, there is a chance that that water could infiltrate into the product through bruises, cuts, etc. on it. The pictures here show this in tomatoes and cantaloupe. And so for certain commodities, not everything, but certain commodities, we would want to discuss that in the farm plan as to what the wash water temperature SOP should be. And that's because, again, we want to just try to prevent this infiltration of water or getting sucked into the product. Typically, this doesn't occur because, as Ingrid said, we don't have a lot of farms that do the post-harvest scope, especially not in their first year through the program. But if it is something that's going to be done with your operation, we will address this with you. We'll also address the water change schedule. So that is something that we'll need to think about as we work through your process. How often are you changing the water out of your tank or your sink? We'll need to ensure that that is clearly written out in the farm plan. Containers, bins, and packaging. Just like Ingrid was saying with a lot of other things, this is a bit redundant because we have touched on this briefly in the field scope, but in the post-harvest scope, there's a lot more detail required. So in this section, P7.1, it's going to ask that we put some information in here about how that packaging was chosen and who's approving any labels that you might be putting on it. We would create an incoming packaging materials inspection log, which is very simple for most of our farms who do this. Just making sure that when that packaging arrives, you are inspecting the box, that it's in good shape, hasn't been damaged. And the packaging registry, again, when they use that word registry, it's just the list is what they're looking for. So what is the packaging that you're purchasing and using to put your product out? The other part here, the written procedure for storage and post-storage handling of those product containers. Again, this is kind of repetitive to what was in the field scope, but we would also include here what are acceptable containers, what are the types of containers that you're using for your product. And again, just like with harvesting, there are prohibited uses. So we're not going to use this packaging to put in cold or damaged product. And it also mentions pallets if they're used, which a lot of farms will store either packaging and or harvested containers of products on packaging. They must be kept in good condition and appropriate, which means that they're not falling apart, they're not broken, they're not dirty, etc. P8 talks about storage. And again, this is, common sense. Your storage areas should be appropriate and not a contamination risk, so they should be clean. Any iced product in storage is handled so that it is not becoming a source of contamination, which means that we don't want to see iced product on top and that ice is melting, the water is dripping onto product that's below it. So if that's the case, everything is properly stored so that that's not happening. And then any non-product storage areas should also be well maintained. If an auditor is auditing the post-harvest scope, they will look at all of your storage areas, storage rooms, spaces, and make sure that things aren't jumbled up in there to where you couldn't get in, you can't clean. This is getting to being able to see that things are clean and also that there's no pest harborage space in there. So you don't have little areas where rats or mice could be hanging out, living, and then eventually contaminating your product. They also want to make sure that chemicals, again, are stored separately. So that should always be a best practice is that your chemicals are stored separately from your product areas. Cooling temperatures. So this is one where when we do have farms who are being audited on this scope, we pay a lot of attention here. If the product is cooled, we do want to make sure that we are meeting the temperature range that is appropriate for that product based on current industry standards. Typically, this is going to be around leafy greens, lettuces, things like that, because there are appropriate storage or product cooling temperature ranges. When we are dealing with this in the farm plan, we will make sure that we put a note in there that the temperature control is required for food safety. We want to be sure that we do this because cooling is not going to be required for all products. We only want to address it when it is required for food safety purposes, for example, for greens. So that's a key phrase, and you'll see that come up throughout the next couple of slides. Cooling equipment has to be maintained so that it doesn't contaminate product. So your sanitation procedures, how often you're going to clean your walkout or your walk-in freezer or your fridge, how it's going to be sanitized, that's going to be all written out in your farm plan in that section. And then it moves into transportation. So from storage to how is it getting to where it's going next? There are a couple of written policies that are required in this section and a few records. One, if you are transporting and you're using refrigerated transport, and again, it's required for food safety, we'll need to know what the predetermined temperature range is. So what this means essentially is that if you're handling a product where refrigeration is required for food safety, so again, something like greens, if you're using a refrigerated truck, that truck should be pre-cooled and we need to know what the temperature range that it is should be in, what that is, and that should be written in the farm plan. This is a record as well. You see in P9.2 and R. So this is something where you would fill out a log in Heavy Connect where, yes, I turned on the reefer van. I checked that the temperature after 5 minutes was within the required range before I loaded the van. That's what this is getting at. Again, going on in this, when refrigeration is required, of course, it should be properly maintained and fully functional. So if you've got a reefer van that you're using and it's not functional, that's going to be a bit of a problem unless we clearly state that the van is being used to transport items that are not required to be cooled. So again, when refrigeration is required for food safety, we have those records of the temperatures when you're loading, before you put it on, when you load, et cetera. So we want to make sure that we're putting product into a van that's not too hot, something that has been pre-cooled. Also, you'll need to make sure that you have a checklist to verify that you looked in and made sure that the inside of the van or the truck was clean and that the refrigeration is working if that's the case. And then P9.6, loading and unloading procedures shall minimize damage and prevent contamination. that's kind of a no-brainer. But we just want to make sure that we note in there what your procedures are for loading. It can be very simple. It could just be that the boxes are hand carried to the truck and stacked. It could be that they're on a pallet or a forklift, whatever it is. We just want to make sure we have that note in there that you are ensuring that you're minimizing damage. And that's pretty much all there is to the post-harvest scope. As we said, it's very repetitive because a lot of the policies have already been developed. However, I will say we do recommend that unless you have a very complex post-harvest packing procedure and dedicated packing area, that we don't do that scope, at least not in the first year. We just want to make sure we get the general and the field scopes underway, have a solid audit, and then we can move into that post-harvest if it's needed. We do want to take a moment to talk about logo use, and this will only take a couple of slides. This is something that I don't think any of our farms currently are using. It is available, though, and accessible to you if you would like to have the USDA GroupGAP, or actually it's a GAP logo, available to put on your product. So there is, of course, a number of requirements around using USDA's logo. And in the logo use scope, it goes over these. There are 4 sections. So the first part is going over how you write about the logo in your food safety plan. So essentially how it's going to be used, who's responsible for making sure that you have an accurate count of the logos that you have, like how many stickers, the inventory. And then also it will note, your farm plan will have to note what are the packages that you're using the logo on. They must be traceable. So for obvious reasons, USDA doesn't want to see a GAP logo out there on things that are not GAP certified or approved. The next part of this goes to the list of approved suppliers. So we would have already done that with you, gone through your approved supplier list. That would be provided to your local auditor office. This is essentially something that is already available. So any of your approved supplier lists, you have that and you can provide it to the state auditor's office if it's requested. All suppliers currently in use by the operation are listed. That one is also already something that's happening. So as we work with you guys, we develop your approved supplier list. Every year we'll be updating that with you. And all suppliers who wish to use the logo have passed an audit. So this really goes to if you're a food hub, an aggregator, you're bringing in somebody else's product. If they want to use the logo, they must also be able to prove that they are GAP compliant, that they have passed an audit. So this is just, again, ensuring that that logo doesn't get slapped on a product package when that product or that farm has not undergone the audit and passed it. And then the last piece of the logo use scope is basically writing out how you're going to use it and on what products exactly. So this means that if you've been audited on a couple of different crops that you're growing, but not everything, and you want to use that logo, it's only allowed to be used on the crops that you have been audited for. So that means that we want to be very specific. If this is something you're thinking that you would like to do, we would make sure that we are clear on exactly what products you've been audited on. If you grow tomatoes and corn, but we only put down tomatoes on our forms that we provide to USDA, we can only use the logo on the tomatoes. All logo items are accountable. So you would need, again, to keep that inventory that was mentioned in the first section, and that would be somebody's responsibility that would be identified in that first part of the logo use scope. You would have an inventory list of the packaging and or labels that have the logo. So essentially, they want to know how many logos you have, or if it's being printed directly on boxes, for example, how many of them do you have? If there's anything that's been discarded because the packaging got messed up, you would want to note that too. And then the last thing here, they have very specific criteria for what the logo should look like. It should be used on packaging and labels that are clean and bright without evidence of previous use and no marks or stains. So again, they just want to make sure that that logo is being used appropriately and only for products that have been certified. It's not available to just anybody. So trying to maintain that sort of elite sense about this. It is a marketing tool, and so I think USDA is trying to set up a way for it to be, again, very controlled when it goes out into the public. That said, as I mentioned, we don't have a lot of farms that use that logo. So something to discuss a little bit later down the line if you think that it might be useful to you in your operation. That's pretty much all we have for today. Next week is one of our last meetings. We're going to talk about the audit process. So now that we've kind of gone through all of the work that we are doing or going to be doing to set you guys up for this audit, we're going to talk about what that audit process is really like. We like to go over this because whenever we have an audit, especially if it's with USDA and not just us, it tends to generate a little bit of anxiety. So we want to go over what you should expect, how to prepare, and basically just, what is it like when this rolls out? So we'll go also through preparation, the areas of each scope and kind of how to think about, as you prepare for the audit, what are the things you need to be ready to show or to talk about? And then, of course, the Q&A. If you've already sent in your invoice payment, thank you very much. And if not, let us know if you need to create a payment plan for that. Next steps, I think farm food safety plans are all underway and will be sent out for you to review pretty soon. And then the last thing I would mention, and I'm going to stop sharing here for just a second. The last thing I'm going to mention is that in our last class, which is not next week, but the following, we will do an assessment. And so we're going to ask everybody to come to that class, do a quick assessment, and then we're going to talk about it. And it's really just an opportunity for us to get a sense of our delivery. Was the content delivery successful? Did it make sense to you guys? There's no right or wrong answers per se. We're not going to grade it. But we do want to make sure that everything that we've been communicating is useful to you and makes sense. And if that's not the case, that gives us the chance to reevaluate how we're providing this information. So definitely want to see everybody in our next two classes. And then that will be it. And we'll release you from these weekly meetings and hopefully be seeing you on a more one-on-one basis following that. Any questions? Small group today. Make sure you guys all get the golden stars for attendance. All right. Oh, Henry, hi. Question?
No question.
Okay. Well, we will not take up too much of your time then. We'll go ahead and wrap up. And just as a recap, the post-harvest scope, if you missed anything in the beginning, just want to make sure everybody knows that it is voluntary. You do not have to do that scope. So as we start through this process, your first year in the program, your first audits, we'll focus on the general and field scope. If you would like to do the post-harvest scope, that's definitely open to you. But it's certainly not a requirement, and especially in this first year, unless you're a food hub or an aggregator, and that's all you're doing. And so in that case, it would be a required scope. So we'll put the recording up a little bit later on today, and we will see you guys next week for class 9. Have audit talk, and if you have any questions about audits, be prepared to bring them to that class, and we're going to finish up after that with one more. So 2 more weeks to go. Thanks, guys. Have a good Wednesday.
Thank you.